Hello. If you're watching this, that means you got my message that we're not having class on Monday. I'm going to turn this a little bit. I migrated back to where the window's causing huge glare. Still not good, but better than what it was. All right, so we won't be having class on Monday the 20th. The reason for that is my daughter is having a surgery, having a couple things done actually. But after that, within a few days, whenever she's better, she'll get to come home. And so she'll finally be out of the NICU, which will be amazing because it'll be nice to be together as a family. Bearing that in mind, so we'll finish up a few things we had left to discuss in this class. And then probably on Wednesday, depending on how far we make it into this, and if you guys have any questions, you want to talk about anything, as I'm going through the book to see, if there's any topics we didn't talk about. We may move into a review for our first exam, which is good because we only have two of those, and they're pretty straightforward. And we do a heavy review before each one, to where basically go through each point of importance, things that could be on the exam, stuff like that, and review for it. So you'll want to make sure you're there for that. Let's see, what else do we need to talk about? If you haven't already done assignment 1, you're way behind them. You need to get that in on you. We'll actually talk a little bit about that in today's discussion. So the last chapter we have left to cover, issues and ethics, I think is the title of it. I'm going to check real quick here. Yeah, Policing America, Issues and Ethics. So we'll start out with talking about issues, then we'll move into some ethical stuff. And when I say ethics, it'll probably be some of the bigger issues within ethics. So one of the first things, I think what we left off with last time, at least I was talking about it with somebody recently, civil asset forfeiture, what exactly it is. So if you've not heard of it before, you're probably aware of what it is. Take this off because it's causing a cramp. What it is so you think about police encounters, and let's say police officer pulls over somebody who's found to be trafficking a large amount of drugs. They won't just seize the drugs and arrest the person, they'll seize the vehicle too. And at that point in time, that vehicle, that asset is now the police's. It's a very common way for police to acquire, well, a lot of different things, whether it's vehicles, whether it's money, whether it's any number of things. Civil asset forfeiture works a little bit different than what, it does, what arrests, prosecution works for people. In general, basically, we have that presumption of innocence. You're presumed innocent. The whole trial is to overcome that presumption, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you are guilty. Well, civil asset forfeiture, assets are guilty, and you have to prove that it's innocent. So you have to prove that its use, that its purpose is not for something that's illegal. The reason why that's in this chapter is because of its use. There are some departments that make the majority of their income based off of civil asset forfeiture. So it's through the things that they acquire in making police stops and those types of things. You don't necessarily have to make an arrest or charge anyone with any crimes to seize someone's goods. We haven't talked about it too heavily in here, but we talked about probable cause and reasonable suspicion probably a little bit. Probable cause being more than reasonable suspicion in terms of the amount we discussed it and also what it means. So anytime you have a police encounter, there is that potential where you have assets that are taken. You don't have to be charged with a crime or anything like that for you to have that property taken. You can find on the internet all kinds of videos where people are talking about massive misuses of it. For example, probably one of the bigger ones I heard was a guy who was traveling across states. I believe it was to purchase a vehicle, and he had that money out in cash with him. So, police officers going to pull that person over. If you're traveling multi-state travel with tens of thousands of dollars, what are they going to think that is for? You're drug trafficking. In that case, what you'd be looking for is a person have drugs on them, do they have a history of it, that kind of thing. And at that point, it's pretty easy to get a hold of it. The police department that did it, though, the person had no history of drug use or drug trafficking or anything like that. There was no evidence of any trafficking whatsoever, but they kept the money anyway. And so at that point in time, you're looking at going through the court processes of proving that it's not for illegal purposes. And so there are some departments that make most of their department's income based off of that, and that's definitely when we start moving into the unethical territory. It can be very much abused. It offers a great resource in terms of I've seen police vehicles, the undercover vehicles, or in some instances sports vehicles and things like that that later be turned into police vehicles. Come through civil asset forfeiture that those were used in the commission of crimes or to aid in them. And as a result, the police are able to take that and use it for better purposes. We also have those that take things that they should have no reason for taking, are taking without real justification, and then it's the burden's on you as the the owner to basically prove that it's innocent, and that's not an easy thing to do. It's something that can be very, very easily abused. I won't go into a whole lot of detail on that, but if you want more information and you want to talk about it more, let me know, and we can queue up a good discussion about that, and I'll show you some videos and some things that'll some of it will make your blood boil, some of it will be it's like, okay, that makes a lot of sense, and um, kind of leads me into a little bit of a discussion on discretion. I don't know if we've talked about that in here, probably not as much. Um, I may have gone so far as to say is that every person who's involved in the criminal justice system at every level has some degree of discretion, meaning they have some degree of choice in the decisions that they make. And so that is it's a very wide range of things that there's discretion attached to. And for the most part, it's a really wide amount of choices available. For example, in terms of policing, you discretionary decisions. Are you going to pull someone over or not? It's like you can see someone who's driving down the road, no license plate on their vehicle or a tag that's from last year, and you make the decision as to whether or not you want to pull them over. If you got something more pressing, maybe you won't. That is your decision. Will you charge them, or not charge them? Will you arrest them? Those types of things are discretionary decisions. Just because a crime is being committed in your presence doesn't mean you have to do something about it. There's a wide array of, wide area for decisions to be made. Trying to think of some other, you know, kind of cross reference another issue. Talk a little more about domestic incidences. Fairly common and one of the most dangerous types of police calls, domestic violence. When you get there, what kind of decisions are you going to have to make? First, you're going to have to talk to all parties involved. You're going to have to make a determination as to who's at fault, who's the one who started this, or who's the one who's done something that's wrong. Is there someone who needs to be arrested or not? Are there any actions to take? Is it something where you just need to make sure that they're separated? Does someone need to be arrested? And there's, like I said, there's so many different variables in there that the way that a police officer decides to resolve such a situation. Some will resolve it. Well, I should say, some will resolve it temporarily. For the most part, what you'll find if you get heavy into any domestic issues is there are long-standing issues that will not have any permanent resolution for some time, and usually the permanent resolutions are not the good ones. That's where you're talking about. Those went really, really bad. We're dealing with domestics. Talk a little bit about the history about that. Is historically, police action was to take no action. This is a social issue. They didn't want to be involved really. I mean, you can look at, and if you guys want to get into this, let me know, and I'll show you some, court cases about a whole bunch of different things that will get you really riled up if this is something that interests you. So it wasn't until I think it was 92 or 94, the Violence Against Women Act went through, and basically it did a whole bunch of things. But one of them was it basically gave women some teeth when it comes to these types of issues, because the longstanding way to resolve an issue is, let's say you get a call from a female whose husband, boyfriend, living partner, whatever, has beaten them. They're visibly beaten. It's like you can find court cases where police officers' response was literally, "Well, what'd you do to deserve that? You must have said something to get this started. What did you do?" Like, and you'll find that kind of they call it today of toxic masculinity. I don't ascribe to that, but that kind of demeanor where it's just anti woman, and it really was. So much so that you can find cases where probably the one of the more heartbreaking ones was it was a woman who had been having a domestic issue, had separated from her husband, and he was threatening her life repeatedly. Would vandalize her home, her property, her house, or not house, but car, um, and did this over a long period of time. Um, they had children, so split. I can't remember if they had split authority or if she had sole custody, split custody or for the sole. But at one point, he takes the kids. Um, didn't have reason to, or I shouldn't say didn't have reason to. Took the kids. Was supposed to have them back by a certain time of night. He doesn't show up at that time. She calls the police, and this is so you've got all these contacts that have been involved over months, years at this point. Documenting the relationship that they had and how much trouble they had. So the police were familiar with them. Police response was basically, all right, well, if they're not home by 10, give us a call back. So no action. 10 o'clock rolls around. She calls. They're still not back. Okay, give it till midnight. Midnight rolls around. They're still not back. The husband's story that she told them before was the husband said that they were taking her ex-husband had was taking them out to the circus or something like that. Maybe it was fair, something of that nature. So midnight rolls around. It's 1 o'clock rolls around. It's, no, 3 o'clock rolls around. And so she ended up not having any police response whatsoever. The case, they ultimately found the guy. I think what happened was I think he may have went to the police station himself with the children dead in the back of his vehicle. At that point in time, it's like, police let that happen to some degree. There's a wide variety of discretion there. And what recourse did she have? Absolutely zero. That was a case that was back in the 80s. She had no recourse. She tried to file a lawsuit, and it was kicked out. And there are cases related. So many cases like that where it's just miscarriages of justice. Ultimately, when it comes to domestics, we'll talk about it. We'll take the use of force stuff too, because it'll kind of relate to this in a second. One of the things I like to ask people is who is responsible for your safety or the safety of those that you love? Name me the people who are responsible. And usually people will say, well, the police, I call them, they take care of it. It's like, no, they have no responsibility for that whatsoever. That's not one of their roles. It says it on the side of the vehicle. It is not one of their roles. Essentially, the only time that they are guaranteed to protect you is if there is a very specific declaration that they will do so, that you're in their custody, or that there's I think one other situation where there's some I want to say it was related to minority status, minority status as protected class kind of thing. Like there's a very specific reason why they should be involved and should be doing something, and it's and when I say minority, I don't mean like race or sex or anything like that. I mean it's a very small select situation, and so it's not a blanket thing that the police are responsible for protecting any one citizen. Yes, that is something that they aspire to do. Yes, that is something a vast majority of officers would not hesitate to step in to help you in, like, you're facing down a deadly threat. Like, there's some that don't. I mean, what was it, Uvalde? If I said Uvalde, you probably are too young to remember this, and it's only a couple of years ago. Out in Texas, there was a school shooter, and school had police on hand. The police also from the town arrived, and they stood down as the person went through executing children. It's like they let that happen. And what recourse do you have? Very, very little. They're not responsible for protecting people. The person who's responsible for that is the person themselves. And when it comes to children, you get a little bit more. So there were some steps they could take, suits that were filed. But I mean, where do you get money? Like, some people are going to lose their jobs and you get money. yeah, that's a piss poor replacement. Um, so that's something to keep in mind. The only one who's responsible for your protection is you. The only one that's responsible for the protection of the ones you love is you. Them too, if they're capable, if they're able to. But ultimately, that's where the responsibility lies. That's something that a lot of people miss out on. They don't really fully appreciate that. It's also why, when it comes to discussion of use of force, when we get into that, I'm going to be. It's one of the reasons why I ask, who likes to shoot, like, because I get a good idea for who's got a good understanding of force to some degree, and the more knowledgeable you are about it, the more likely you are to be one of the people who will respond appropriately whenever that situation will arise. It's not to say it will arise certainty with any degree of certainty, but the probability that there will be in the situation in your lifetime that you will need to know how to handle yourself in a force on force situation is always increasing, right? So when you get throughout the course of your entire life, you could say it's probably a damn near certainty. So it's good information to know if any of you are have no experience with anything like that and you want to learn more. Let me know, and I can kind of redirect you to appropriate parties, that kind of thing. If you're looking to going into policing, you probably already have some information about this. You probably already have people who are trained, who are around you, who could help you learn more. If you are interested in policing and don't have those types of things, this is the point where you need to start thinking about that. Um, the will to act is something that most people don't have, and some of the like the domestic things, you can see that that's the case. There, it's like, not really my problem. I'm not going to do anything, and those things devolve from there. After the Violence Against Women's Act, there was more of an emphasis on requiring police to take action in domestic situations. Now the biggest decision is are we going to arrest anyone, and who? And in general, you could say there's almost a default position to arrest the male in a male traditional male female encounter. That's not to say that's always what will take place or that's always what's warranted, because it certainly isn't. But that's kind of the default. You need to have a good showing for who was the aggressor, to make sure that the appropriate party is the one who is taken away from wherever that location is, and the distance is given there, because allowing that time for things to cool down, you can either move it into a legal process if that needs to take place, and if it should, it should, or you could have the informal resolution between the two parties, which is more frequent, and usually what that ends up looking like for the vast majority of people is that have domestic issues is it doesn't really get resolved. It's just going to be a recurrent issue for in perpetuity of that relationship. So it's a really disheartening thing. It's also one of the most dangerous types of phone calls for police to respond to. Basically, what you start looking at is whenever police insert themselves in any type of situation like that, they're trying to figure out what's going on, and taking the most minimal steps, because ideally you want police to take the most minimal steps, because the more intrusive it is, well, let me explain it this way. If you call the police, let's say someone kicked in your door, right? You called the police for that. You want them to take care of that. You don't want them to look in your house and see if you're doing anything wrong and to start using the law against you. That sometimes happens. And in domestics, it's even more so, because you have both parties, and sometimes you're dealing with people who are, well, I should say, sometimes in domestics you're almost always dealing with people who have close relationships. And so the minute you start looking at, we're going to arrest this party and charge them with this crime, you might anger the person who's actually the victim in that situation. There have been many instances where an arrest is being made and the victim turns around and attacks police officers. Right? It's just part of the nature of policing. We talked a little bit about roles in policing and role conflict. If I didn't, I think Dr. Fitzgerald did, and that's a prime example of one. It's like, are you here to help or are you here to hinder? And if you're here to help with this situation, does the resolution for it cause more of a hindrance or not? And it's very difficult to tell, because the purposes, their relationship, the people who are involved in it may have a completely different view from those who are an outside party. And whether that's positive or negative, it's like, that's too difficult to say in general. But if you type look at the specifics of each individual relationship, and no officer's going to have enough information to have a good picture of the entire relationship. So it's like you're asking way too much, but that's society. That's the way those types of instances go, and you just try to make the most appropriate steps to move forward in whatever direction is best for all, and particularly for anyone who's a victim, and know that you know most victims do want help. Some don't, and that's a really hard thing for some people to grasp, because if you've not seen anyone who's been in that kind of situation or that mindset, getting someone to recognize that they need help is one thing. For someone who doesn't want help and actively enjoys that kind of victimization, because there are people out there who are like that, is a completely different situation. I can tell you from personal experience, I've known people who were directly like that for a long period of time, and it's like it didn't matter who it was with or what exactly had happened. That was the kind of relationship that they desired, and they would do anything to maintain it, and just as much violence as they could. And it was deeply disturbing. You're dealing with mental illness at that point. But that's part of one small aspect of that. It's just so complex. How you resolve it is very, very difficult. Best thing is to arrest one person to remove them from the situation, if especially if it's violent. But in general, you at least want to have some type of time separation. You're going to spend the next 1 to 3 days away from this property, kind of thing, or else I'm going to arrest you. Kind of resolution is also common. All right, that's a little bit about domestics, discretion, civil asset forfeiture. When I was looking through the textbook, I don't think I talked about broken windows theory. So we talked a little bit about the Kansas City Patrol, preventative patrol experiment, Kansas City experiment. How basically it didn't work. Broken windows theory is a really, really interesting thing. So anytime you take any crime theory courses, anytime you deal with theories, there are explanations for why things work a certain way. We talked a little about theories. I think it was in chapter 2. Broken windows theory kind of ends up being tied into social disorganization theory. So you talk about disorganized areas tend to have more crime. Broken windows theory, it's heavily involved in policing. Basically, what happened is two people, Wilson and Kelling. So this had been in the 70s. Yeah, it was the 70s, maybe in early 80s. I want to say it was the 70s. Maybe it was, I can't remember. But basically what they did is they took a vehicle and they took it to 2 or 3 different areas of the city. And what they wanted to see is they want to see how long before this vehicle is vandalized. So if you think, okay, abandoned vehicle, how long is it before the tires get taken, stereos stolen, anything that's in there is taken out, anything of value, that kind of thing. And everyone's got their stereotypical images of inner city areas where you leave a vehicle and you come back and it's on blocks, kind of thing. And so that's what they wanted to test. They wanted to see, it's like, is there a pattern here in terms of this area you expect to see this area you expect to see that kind of thing. I think it was Kelling was a former police officer turned academic. So they did this, and they left those vehicles there for a period of time. I want to say it was more than a day, may have been a few days. And they returned to each of the vehicles, and lo and behold, nothing had happened. It's like nothing happened at all. And that in itself is kind of surprising, unexpected. So what they did is they went and they broke out one of the windows. And upon doing that, I want to say in every area, the vehicle was then vandalized. You had the stereo stolen out, that kind of thing, anything that was just torn up. And basically what it was is that first indicator that no one cares, that's the one that sets everything off. That if you're giving off that signal that this vehicle is under care, that's being watched for, it belongs to someone, no one's going to touch it, or at least it's less likely. But as soon as you send off that signal that no one cares at all, boom, that's when all the crime happens. It was so much so, I think in one of the areas that whenever they busted out the window, I want to say there's some people around that saw what they were doing, and they joined in to help out and tearing the vehicle up, smashing out other windows and stuff. So they had fun with it. And that's that's kind of the case. If you send off the signal that no one cares, that's where crime will take place. And it was behind a lot of the zero. I would. It's somewhat associated with zero tolerance policing, where you look at even minor crimes are punished and with certainty. Like if I said code enforcement, how long's your lawn? How tall is it? Is your grass too tall? And we're going to fine you for that. How many vehicles are in your driveway? Those types of things. Um, the reason why police will sometimes crack down on those things is because of this. Because if you give the idea that an area is well kept, that the people there care, crime will find a different area. It'll go to somewhere where someone's not watching, where someone doesn't care, because then it's easier to commit and you have less likelihood of being caught. At least that's what's going on in the minds of the criminals. Um, and it works. It works both ways. It's like if you've ever been driving through Tulsa and you're in residential areas, and once your standard residential area, you feel comfortable. You start to drive in an area where you start seeing bars in the windows or boarded up windows, you start getting nervous and you make sure your doors are locked. It's like that kind of thing. It's like it's the same concept here. You send the signal that you care or the area isn't cared for, and that's what starts to make people very, very uncomfortable. And there's been a lot of research to back that up. That at least from a certain perspectives, that people's comfort, their fear levels, crime itself tends to be located in areas that are not well kept. It's also one of the things that's really interesting about this. One of the first key signs that an area is going to drop precipitously in terms of quality, like that area is just going to go to crap real quick, as if you see anybody who's doing open air drug transactions, where instead of like you see your local drug dealer, he's got people coming in and out of his house, 3-4 times a day, and they're only in there for 5 minutes. Like, yeah, they're probably dealing drugs. Now, that's one thing. It's like, it's not good. But if you see them doing it on their front porch or in their yard or out on the street, just out, and like you can literally see the money and the drugs exchanging hands. Like, they don't care anymore. They don't think the police are going to come, and they're going to do whatever they're going to do, and nobody's going to stop them. People who can, they move out of the area. The area quickly declines in terms of its ability to come together as a community to deal with that problem. And then the people who are criminals there are emboldened. So that's broken windows theory in brief. Okay. Let's get in here a little bit about recruiting and hiring processes, issues with that. This also kind of ties into use of force to a small degree too, because you can see the correlations. If I said Ferguson, Missouri, you may or may not recognize that name. Some of you I bet probably would. Most of you with your age probably not, because it became popular back in about 2014. So you'd have been all of maybe 8 to 12 years old. Like, that makes me feel really old, because I was already a parent by then. Yeah, time goes by so fast. But I'm off topic. Michael Brown. If I said Michael Brown, more of you will recognize that. Michael Brown's use of force case, where Darren Wilson, his name, I was trying to think of it earlier, shot Michael Brown multiple times, killing him. Police outcry related to it, public outcry related to it, the use of force, all of that. One of the biggest things was highlighted in that community is their police force was like 98, 99% white. Ferguson, Missouri is majority black. The demographics of the area are, and I want to say it's not like a simple majority where you're like looking at 51%. I think it's quite a bit higher than that. So you're talking about an area that your police department looks nothing like what the citizens do. And that's one of the things that's been behind a big push in terms of recruiting and hiring processes, trying to get the police departments to more closely mirror their community. Think about community policing. We talked about that a fair bit. One of the things is you want your community and your police department to be close together. And one of the ways that you can try to help aid that is to, make them seem as similar as you can. And we have such a stark contrast just from something you can just readily see. It gets a lot harder to start building up those relationships. Doesn't mean it's impossible. Doesn't mean it can't be done, or anything. You just add in some difficulties potentially. And in that area, with dealing with what you were dealing with, particularly at that time, a white officer shooting what they call them, a gentle giant, just a kid who had done a few wrong things. It's like, we'll address that in a second, but it's like what people there saw was something that would really highlight the division between the people and the police in that area. And more widely, there's been a big push for increasing diversity in recruitment, mainly for that fact is you want your community to ideally resemble your police to resemble your community. So typically what you're talking about there is you change your recruiting procedures, your advertisements, that kind of place where you're going and trying to actively recruit people. Things like, common things are used. I think the book talks a little about the cadet program. That's basically where you go into high schools and those who are interested in policing. You can do it some in college. They'll look to start moving you into programs that will get you familiar with the police. That way, if you do decide you want to go that way for a career path, you can do that. But recruiting's there's a number of ways to do it. Main thing is that you when you do it, you should have certain goals that you're trying to reach. They don't always do that. Sometimes it's are they recruiting? Are we trying to get more? Do we need people? Yes, it's almost across the board that you need people, except for in like really rural areas. Sometimes you might not. And the diversity thing's been a relatively recent thing that's really being pushed in some areas. It's not to say it's a good or a bad thing either way. I mean, there are positives and negatives to all things. But it is one facet that's also changed in recruiting. Hiring processes are pretty straightforward. There's a number of things you need to do. I think whenever I was talking a little about the political era, I talked to you a little about old hiring practices, where you have the right party, where you male, where you white, and where you have a certain height. It's like, that's basically it. Now it's not like that, of course. There are a number of steps to go through before you'll become a police officer. Typically what that ends up looking like are, your formal application. You'll have interviews, you'll be put through tests, and there's physical tests, mental tests, the oral board, or sometimes called oral interviews. And all of them test different things. So if we were to go back, 30 years or so, your physical tests are going to be based, they have been likened to those same, white male of a certain height type tests of the political era. They're not quite that bad, but they were. There was definitely a bias towards being male and being strong and the size thing. Basically now it's more towards technique, and that's the way it should be. Your strength is definitely needed. You need someone who's physically capable. If the book goes into much detail about it, they'll talk about bona fide, qualified, what is it? Requirements, bona fide, qualified. I think that's the term for it. Basically, are these qualifications something that you really do actually need, right? So like now what they do is one of the tests might be, here's a weighted dummy. It weighs about the weight of an average person. So we'll say 180 pounds. And you need to be able to pick it up and run with it so far. Why? Because in the line of policing, you might come across, let's say an automobile accident. Person's unconscious, their vehicle is getting ready to explode. You got to get that person and you out of there. And so those types of things. Before it'd be like, how many pull-ups can you do? How many push-ups can you do? That kind of thing. It's like that's good to know, but really what you want to know is technique and ability. When you talk about bona fide requirements, it'd be like things like in terms of policing, are you physically capable of picking up someone of a certain weight? If I remember correctly, all of you had some type of part-time job or something before. So you filled out job applications and it'll give you a little bit of descriptions like, can you sit for this long? Can you stand for this long? Can you lift an object up to 20 pounds? It's like, yeah, well, this might be needed for that type of job, but they're just trying to find that out. If you said no, if it's not required for the job, they won't take your application, set it aside. And that's the way it is for most things. It's like, okay, it's good to know that. We'll make sure that those accommodations are met. But if it's something that's required, it's something that has to be met for the position, then at that point in time, those types of applications be set aside or set to a different type of position. Um, the oral boards are interesting because of the fact that those are set purposely for the purpose of stressing you out. They want to see how you perform under stress, under pressure. Um, so what they'll do is you'll come in, you'll meet with a board of people, and it'll be any members from the administration of policing, probably from your city board, probably some stakeholders in the community, that kind of thing. So you're meeting with high profile people, high administrators, and they're going to ask you difficult questions, and they're going to put it on in a stressful way to make sure that you are able to handle yourself in stressful situations. The mental test is usually the mental examinations are usually the one of the most expensive aspects of it, and one of the things that probably disqualifies the most people, because you get a lot of people who are basically not fit for duty. It's not that they're physically incapable or anything like that, so that they just they aren't in the right mindset. They aren't a good fit for the type of people that you need for policing. And of course, it's usually physical and mental examinations. Those things take place on early. The oral interviews are one of the last steps where you actually meet people. This takes quite a bit of time. When it comes to we'll talk a little about that. So your police department and the diversity stuff. Probably the most interesting thing to me is police departments never make publicly available what their pool of candidates look like. So when they say that. And I can tell you why, and I can tell you, well, I'll just say this. There are reasons why they don't, and that's mainly for what would be said is that maybe some of these tests are having a disparate effect on race, sex, or whatever classification you want to talk about. There are disparities in those who make it through these tests versus others, and that means it's a biased test. So basically what happens, they end up blowing a hole in their ability to do the current hiring processes, current tests, and they'd have to revise the whole thing. But you don't have a good, clear indication of what one's applicants look like versus the community versus the police, because you have to think people from the community, they apply, and it's not going to be everyone. And then some of those people will get hired into become police officers. So it's like a funnel effect, right? So you never really get a good idea for how big or how narrow that funnel is, or what even that funnel is dipping into in terms of what are we putting into it. And so whenever we set up, and that's where we run into issues with certain larger cities, really, is when we start really putting the diversity hires as the number one issue. That's where you start to find those high profile instances where like someone has not had adequate training, is out on the streets, and someone dies, that kind of thing. Sad, but that's usually what ends up happening is, diversity is an important aspect of it, but how far you put it up in terms of priorities is important too. And I've seen some departments that it is their number one thing, right? Like we have one position available for this rank, and it needs to be someone of this specific minority status, because they'll have, this is what we need right now. And while you 10 people qualify for this position, we're not even going to consider you for a year, because we're going to hold that open for someone who's of that particular class that we need. At that point in time, you start running into problems, because you have qualified people for a position that's open. That position is staying open where no one's doing the work whatsoever. And people who are below don't have an opportunity to move up, even qualified. So you run into all kinds of problems. And from a citizen's point of view, I look at it as, so basically you have a salaried position that you're taking money for and not having anyone fulfill that job, but you're still taking in that money from taxes. It's like, do you really need that position? Usually it's best to see it's like, okay, we need these positions filled. Diversity is a priority. So, what ends up happening is they weigh that in tandem with someone's ability. So it's like if you have two candidates that are equal, and let's say number of service years, number of same degree education, same kind of background, and one's a male and one's a female, or one's white and one's black, and you're in Ferguson, Missouri. It's like, okay, give none to the black person because you have this very, very definite organizational need for trying to get closer to matching your area that you're serving. So that's a little bit about those issues. I'm sure there's probably some things I'm missing there in terms of what the book has. And I'll kind of look back at that and see if there's anything we really need to talk about. But if you guys have any ideas about what you want to talk about, usually the diversity issue stuff comes up first because there's been such a big push towards that in the last 10 years. And it's important. But in terms of priorities, it should never be the number one thing. I mean, you can see the same thing in politics where, this candidate says, I'm going to make half of my board female. It's like, that's good. Just I wouldn't lead with that. I'd say I'm going to get the most qualified people in the field. And when we hire those people, once they're hired, it's like I hired the most qualified people. Just so happens to be, look, it's half and half. That would be a good way to present that message. Not that that's the one thing you're looking at or the most important thing. It's an important thing. Just don't make it number one, or otherwise you can run afoul of things. Let's see here. So use of force. I have no idea how long this video is. I forgot to look at the clock. So hopefully I don't run too long. If I do, it will probably be good because we do need to do a little bit of catching up. So use of force. The first thing I would ask you is if you were curious about how to determine whether or not someone has used excessive force, or what would be excessive force for the police in a given situation, where would you look? What were going to be your resources for looking to see what things govern the amount of force a police officer can use in a given situation? That's a hard thing to think about just from a citizen's point of view, because it's like, okay, when you look at the situation, you kind of see and make a determination. Yeah, that seemed excessive, or that was violent and it didn't need to be, that kind of thing. But there are a number of places you want to look, right? You want to look at department policy, any statutes that relate to use of force. You want to look at first and foremost would be, any court cases that involve use of force. So you look at state, your localized ones, your state level ones. And you also want to look at federal level. So you got all those different places: state case law, federal case law, and department policies, those types of things. All of those will dictate what an officer is authorized to do. Yes, you start at the widest, federal level, because that's going to cover everybody. And you get more individualized for each police department as you get closer to that department. And so there's a wide variety in what situations are authorized, what things are authorized and what things aren't. There was a pretty big talk probably about 6 years ago about chokeholds in New York City, because their police department did not, their policies disallowed it. It forbade the use of chokeholds. What happened was the police officer in New York put someone in a chokehold and killed them. As a result, it was like they already had that policy in the book, but hey, you violated that policy and this person died. Basically, what ended up happening to that officer was, I think that person might have gotten something written up about on the personal record. It's like no charges filed or anything like that, because when you start looking at the state level or the federal level, is that use of force for that situation excessive or not, or is that something the average officer would do? And that's typically what you're looking at is given a specific situation, will an officer, the average officer, view the force that was used as something that was reasonable? They call it objective reasonableness. That's the standard for use of force. It's not easy to do, not an easy decision to make. And it's something that in terms of society, it's all over the place. You see people make snap decisions about, whether this situation called for this level of violence, or that guy didn't deserve to be shot. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. It's really a complicated and nuanced area. To start out, I would ask you, if we were in class, what constitutional amendment is associated with use of force? What constitutional amendment would you invoke if you were bringing forward a case against, the police for excessive use of force? It's a Fourth Amendment case. Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, unreasonable search and seizure. So you think about, they're using force to seize you. But also, when you talk about the two main levels of force, you have deadly and non-deadly uses of force, right? So those are the big two big distinction. One kills, the other one doesn't. You have, some textbooks will put together a continuum. I can't remember if the intro book does. If you take procedures, there's one in there. Basically, what I tell you is, that's a good general idea of what a continuum is. If you look up use of force continuum online, you'll see several. And basically, what you should get from that is, it's some general themes that you'll see, but there isn't anything that's real, strict or hard that says, okay, where you put someone's arm behind their back and you twist it, that's a level 2. While, a punch to the eye socket is a 3, or a knee to the groin is somewhere between two. You won't see anything like that. What it is they try to kind of classify things a certain way and put a level to it. But there's so much variability. To say that is a taser. Taser, is that a use of force that's higher or lower than a punch to the face? It's like that's a really hard thing to really come to a conclusion with. Some people say it is, some people say it isn't. Is a joint lock, like say that one with your arm behind your back, is that higher or lower than that taser? Most people probably say lower, but it's really hard to tell. It's like, well, one of those you can cause permanent damage with. And if you rotate that person's shoulder out of socket and you do it just right, it's like when it heals, it will never be the same. It's like it will always have problems. It will be functional, but it will always have problems. Or I've seen certain joint locks where when they put them on there, your tendons usually don't snap. Sometimes they can, but usually the bone breaks first. But it's where the tendon snaps. It's like, yeah, that's never going to work right. I mean, it'll never be 100%. It will go back after surgery to be close to, but you're always at risk for it tearing right again, and it won't ever have the same degree of functionality it had before. The other thing about use of force is that the amount of force that's authorized by police. So the book, it mentions in there Tennessee versus Garner. So what I'd tell you about Tennessee versus Garner is it's one of the leading use of force cases. So it took place in the 70s. And basically what happened with it, back then, most places had a fleeing felon rule. Basically what that meant is if you committed a felony and you were fleeing the police, they could kill you. At that point in time, they could be shot in the back of the head while you're running away. That kind of thing. Today, most people see that and be like, well, that's really excessive. Well, back then, you didn't have people who fled the police like what they do today, right? So if you stop and think of how many innocent people on sidewalks have been run over by someone who's fleeing the police and being an asshole. It's like, that happens. I've not personally seen like eyewitness at the time, but I've seen it happen. I've seen the fallout, that kind of thing. It's like, that's a bunch of people making really bad decisions and innocent people paying the price for that. Back in the 70s, if you committed a felony, you were fleeing the police, they said stop, you didn't, you were going to be put down, that kind of thing. Tennessee versus Garner, what happened in that case is exactly that. It was, can't remember the name of the town. Nighttime burglary. Police get a phone call from a neighbor saying, hey, the house right next to me is getting burglarized. There's somebody in there and they're taking stuff. And I don't know if anybody's home or not. So police get called out. They don't have contact with the homeowner because it ended up being the homeowner wasn't there, but they don't know that. They know we're not having contact with the homeowner. So this could be they're not there and it's getting burglarized. It could be a hostage situation. It could be any number of things. So when the police arrive, they make contact with the neighbor. Right, so the neighbor tells them what's going on. And one officer goes to the front door. The other officer goes around to the back door and makes the announcement to police and he's coming in. Dude fled out the back door and he got by the officer. As he was fleeing, there's a fence out back, a chain link, and the guy started climbing it. Officer said, stop. He didn't. Officer drew his gun and put a round right into the back of his skull, dropped him. Turned out that there was no one home. So it was just a nighttime burglary. The person stolen was a purse that had $5 in it. So literally, it was a situation where, Fourth Amendment issues, search and seizure. That person had a seizure. Their life had been seized, and that's kind of seizure you can't take back. Right? There's no replacing that for the cost of $5. Now, in that situation, you look at the harm that was done versus the outcome there, and there is a definite disparity there. There's definitely, it is not in balance. Right? The way the statutes in Tennessee were written at the time, a burglary during the night, because people were more likely to be at home, was written as a felony. So this would fall clearly in the fleeing felon rule, and it did. And so the officer was not punished for this, but the case itself, they revised that to say that the use of force to shoot a fleeing to deadly force to stop a fleeing felon is no longer acceptable. Right? I don't think the officer got. Now I think about that. Now it's anyhow. I don't think anything happened to the officer with this one. I'd have to double check that. But the use of stopping a fleeing felon using deadly force, right? You can't do that anymore. It's not equal. So what you have to do is use a reasonable amount of force, what is called for in a situation. Basically, the only time you can use deadly force is whenever you're dealing with a life or death situation where it's there's grave and imminent injury to you as an officer or someone, the public, that kind of thing. And at that point in time, you are able to use force. To go a step further, to kind of be more cleanly, the objective reasonableness is a standard that the average officer, when confronted with the same situation, the same knowledge, would find it appropriate to respond in a similar way. It's like, that's how you tell. People make snap decisions about use of force all of the time, and it is probably, as someone who works in this area, it's one of the most aggravating things I've ever seen. People who have hard stances on a subject that they know so frequently know so little about that it's just infuriating. Anytime there's a breaking case, the information you're getting is usually not from the police because they're still in the process of investigating it. So their information is not available. If you get video, then it's like, okay, this is much better. I can make it. I can start to understand what exactly happened. If you're left with eyewitness accounts, it's like they're frequently lies. That Michael Brown case I referenced earlier, it's like, that's what happened there. If you ever heard hands up, don't shoot, realize that Michael Brown is the case that started with. And that was a complete lie. He attacked the officer and was charging at him at the point that he was shot by the officer. The medical records prove that. It's actually one of the best documented cases, publicly available documented cases that I've ever seen. I think it was at the New York Times, still had it up the last time I checked, a couple months back, and it's tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of pages of information, statements, witness statements, transcripts from the trial, pictures, evidence, all kinds of stuff. It's amazing. So yeah, there's a lot going on with that. The things that you want to consider as anyone who would have to make a decision. So if let's say if you're going to become a police officer, be intimately familiar with how to make that determination, the factors that are important in making that determination. What constitutes a serious or deadly threat. If you're dealing, let's say you're my size, I'm 5'10" and just breaking 200. If someone who's a foot taller than me and has 150 pounds on me comes up to physically attack me, can I use my gun to drop that person? It's like, they don't have any weapons on them whatsoever, not at all. It's like, yes, I'm authorized to do that. Because of the fact of their size and the difference between the two of us, they are themselves a deadly threat. Like that's the way that works. The likelihood they can impose serious and life-threatening injuries or death is extremely high. Now, if it was let's say it was a dwarf who's barely breaking 3 foot tall and came out with his fists up and I drew a weapon on him like that and shot him, like, yeah, no, that's not called for. It's like clearly. But also when you talk about use of force in general, realize that no matter what continuum you use or what level of force that you're using, any force whatsoever can cause death. And I mean that even the slightest degree of physical force, like physical contact, a strike, can cause death. You hit someone in just the right place, at just the right time, you can kill them. You knock them over and they fall and hit their head, they can die. You hit them with the taser and they have an unknown heart condition. It stops, they're gone. You know, if they have, let's say they have some massive allergy to hot peppers and you hit them with pepper spray, they choke to death because they suffocate because their anaphylaxis. It's like any one of these things can kill someone. A firearm, is a firearm always a deadly weapon? It's like, most of the time, no. It's like most, police shootings, most shootings in general. It's like person gets shot, they live. It can be a deadly one. It can just be, force and use of a weapon. Most common use of a weapon is actually in drawing it. And if you want to get to kind of cross reference this with you and your personal defense, it's like it is a very effective form of defense. It can be deadly. It's something that can be wielded, whether it's by that dwarf, whether it's by the guy who's 6'10", or whether it's by someone my size or one of you. It can be very effective, very efficient, can be wielded by anyone, and no longer makes it a size game where it's about how big you are or your fighting abilities or anything like that. It just completely negates that. That being said, something most people don't realize about firearms is how often they're used. So if I asked you how many people died from a firearm in a given year, some of you, it's like you probably think it's a lot of people. And it is. It is. You're talking about most years it hovers right around 30,000 people, somewhere, give or take 10 to 15,000. I don't think I've seen any as high as 45,000 in a given year, but usually it's around 30,000. And those people die by firearm deaths. Uses of a firearm are much, 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 much higher. So we'll go with deaths and talk about that one for a second. If you've ever seen anyone do a debate on deadly weapons, guns, or debate on guns, it's like first thing that they'll do is they'll tell you, okay, if you look at those deaths, you have to separate them out into the three different categories that they really are. So you have criminals killing people, justifiable homicides, and suicides. Okay, so half of that 30,000 or whatever exact number is, about half of those are suicides because it's a very efficient way, quick way. Not good that it happens. It's sad anytime it does, and it only keeps things from getting better. It doesn't make things doesn't help anyway. It keeps active suicide as a response to any stress in life, anything like that. It's like it's a symptom of usually major depression, but what people don't realize in that depressive state is all it does is prevent things from getting better. It doesn't help in any way. Just it makes things infinitely worse for those who survive, and just prevents things from getting better for you. But it's very, very quick. And so about half of those are suicides. So you take those half out, so now you're doing 15,000. And it's not an even split. There's more criminal use than there is justifiable. Justifiable homicide would be self-defense or police officers who've shot their firearm in the line of duty. So I'm on the video. Go away. No, I did not. Get out. My oldest son. He's always a pain. He does not listen. It only took what, 3 times, twice. I didn't have to throw anything at him this time, but that's a rarity. And I would not edit that out if I did. There's force for you. Usually what I do is for force stuff, if you take procedures, and I'm teaching it, when we talk about use of force, I'll bring him in for class that day and I'll show you what use of force looks like. Put different logs, choke holes, that kind of thing. So that way you can see, like, okay, here's how you do it, and here's really how you do it if you want to apply it well. Yeah, that works. See, kidding? No, not kidding about that. That's actually what I do, and it's quite fun. So I was talking about use of force, firearms. That's what I was talking about. So You're talking about a few thousand that are criminal use, murders, that kind of thing. Self-defense is a smaller number. But that's not all defensive use of firearms. You're talking about the vast majority of citizens who have firearms, carry firearms, and use them in self-defense never fire a single shot. Estimates for how many times that happens in a given year ranges from 2 to 400,000 instances of someone draws their firearm on someone who's intent on committing a crime against them. The criminal sees the gun and runs. And I can tell you personal stories where I've had, because living in Little Rock, there have been a few times. It's like, that's personally what has happened. It's like that is exactly what happened. It's kind of a dangerous thing, because if they don't, then you need to be ready to use it right away. But that's the way most of them go, is that as soon as that firearm comes out, they see it, they realize, okay, this is not going to go as easily as I thought, and we'll leave rather than stay and fight. So by far, their use is vastly undersold by anything you've ever heard, and that's from academics, those in this field that do those calculations. And the size, the amount of deaths criminally caused by them is it's still a large number, but it's small when you think about 300 million people in this country, or how many people die from medical malpractice in a given year. Look that number up, and then you'll see it's like that's one of the leading causes of death. And there's a few extra digits there in comparison, that kind of thing. It's like you start dealing with real big numbers, not small numbers. And yet one is constitutional guaranteed, the other one isn't so much. And so it's like you start seeing kind of the nature of the way life is here in this country. If any of you want, have had experience with firearms or anything like that, you want to know more, let me know. And like I said, we can get that sorted out. It's probably, the way I look at it, the way I like to tell everybody, is you should have some basic knowledge for how most firearms work, in terms of, is it a revolver, is it a semi-auto, bolt, something, pump action, something. Know how to work it, so that way, if one ever comes into your possession by chance, you know how to disarm it if you should need to. Let's say, school teachers, I found this pistol in the kid's backpack when he came to school. It's like, okay, you now have a loaded firearm in your hands and you're surrounded by kids. Can you put that into a safe state without putting any of them in danger? That kind of thing. It's like, I think everyone should have at minimum that kind of knowledge. But most people just kind of keep distant. Okay, I think that's enough about use of force. If you want to know anything more about it, let me know, because I can talk. I can talk quite a bit more on this topic. And I can, if you want to know cases to look at, that kind of thing, I can give you that. If you want to know about issues, I can tell you about that. If you want to know how things work, I can tell you that. The next thing I want to talk about, and the last thing I want to talk about, corruption in policing. That's a big issue. So that was the focus of the assignment. The assignment was to have you look at the Lexow, the Knapp, and the Mullen commissions. I think one of those was a committee, but basically all the same kind of thing. Realize the first big thing I want you to take from that is you're talking about 100 years of that kind of commissions or committees taking place, addressing the same basic issues with police departments. New York, I think one of those might have been in LA. I think Mullen was. I can't remember for certain. But across the country, same, not the exact same finding, but same kinds of issues that they're seeing related to corruption, related to use of force, related to basic issues in policing. They're always going to be there, and how we address them is very, very difficult, and we'll never have a way to fully address it, just because the number of people you're dealing with and the range of behaviors varies so much. I should probably tell you a little bit about Knapp Commission. I know the book talks a little about that in terms of grass eaters versus meat eaters. I remember seeing a question on the exam or the quiz that was about that. So the Knapp Commission took place in the 1970s. That one of the things it did is it outlined the difference between officers who were simply willing to accept the opportunity when it came by, the opportunity for, unethical behavior, criminal actions, those types of things. Like, okay, so who's going to go out and uh, you know, like I pulled somebody over and they said, well, here's $500, let me go, forget the fact that I'm carrying these drugs on me, that kind of thing, and just kind of let me go on the way, and we'll be okay. Like those are called grass eaters, right? Meat eaters are those who would actively pursue it. Like, okay, I pulled this person over, and well, you give me $100, I'll let you go. I won't even give you a warning, man. That kind of thing. So those are meat eaters. Those are two big distinctions they had. The Knapp Commission, um, one thing. Every commission that takes place usually has some type of incident that led up to it. Um, if I said, if Mullen Commission is the one I'm thinking of, it's one that took place in LA in like 1990s, early 90s. The thing that precipitated that was Rodney King. If it's not Mullen, there was another commission over there in Los Angeles for Rodney King. Same kinds of issues: corruption, lying, excessive use of force in that one. But also corruption was part of it too, because they lied about things in the reports and all that stuff. And people covered it up, that kind of thing. Rodney King, if you're not familiar with Rodney King, that's a very clear case of excessive force. And police officers, then there was another one recently that was similar to it, where a person who's basically on the ground, they're still just beating them, and then handcuff them, then beat them some more, and it's like, yeah, when you're talking about multiple officers beating a person who's already incapacitated, you've gone well above anything that's authorized, and you need to face the full penalty of the laws there yourself. So the Knapp Commission, probably the most interesting thing about that, and it really highlights the inherent problems with corruption and how you deal with it. The thing that precipitated the Knapp Commission was an officer who went to the press showing evidence of corruption in the New York City Police Department. His name was Frank Serpico. That name may sound familiar to you if you like Hollywood movies, or Al Pacino films, or if you just like stories about police corruption and people who do the right thing. So basically, there's a movie about this. It's Al Pacino. It's dramatized. It's a fairly good film. Some changes, but the basic gist of it is this. Serpico, he was aware of bribery, the corruption, all that kind of stuff that was taking place in his police department. I want to say there were times he worked at Vice, there were times he worked in a few other areas too. He had gone to his superiors about the issues and was not getting any response whatsoever. They did not want to do anything with it about it at all. So after a few years of that, he finally had enough and went and took it to the media. Here is direct evidence of police misconduct, police misconduct, corruption, so on and so forth. And when you bring receipts like that, you get a lot of attention, and it did. And so what ended up happening to him was, not too long after that, he was on duty, and him and two other officers were sent to serve an arrest warrant in an apartment building. And so they go there, and they go up, flight. I forget what story it was on, but it wasn't on the ground level, but it was up in the building. And knocks on the door. Serpico knocks on the door. Door opens up, and as soon as the guy sees it's police, he goes to slam it back in on his face. And by this point in time, Serpico's pushed on the door, and he got trapped kind of partway in the door. And so the person who's behind the door, actually, let me back up. As he's trapped behind the door, he's yelling for his backup. He turns to look, and they are gone. They left him. It's like they literally left him. By the time he turns right back around, he sees a gun in his face, and it's going off. He got shot in the face. I'm trying to think if he got shot anywhere else. I don't remember off the top of my head. And his backup just left him. Two other officers just straight up just walked out. Now, whether or not this was a prearranged hit or not is unknown, but Could have been, or could have just been simply, dangerous situation. You do it yourself, and we're not happy with you because you're affecting our bottom line because you're limiting the opportunity to make money. Because that's the ways the police officers made money is, you make a lot of money off of bribery, off of those types of illicit dealings and things like that. So Serpico lived. Ended up ambulance showed up, picked him up, took him to the hospital. He was transported with a police officer. Police officer didn't know it was Serpico. When he found out after they got to the hospital, he went on record saying that if I'd have known it was Serpico, I'd have left that bastard to die, something to that effect. The backup officers didn't call the ambulance. They didn't do anything. They were just gone. It was actually one of the neighboring apartments had someone in there that heard the gunshot, went out and saw Serpico laying on the ground, shot in the face. And he's the one who called the ambulance. So following this, Serpico got a commendation for his service. When he got his commendation for his service, his two backup officers got a commendation as well. Right? Serpico, his career path was stunted because of this, because no one wanted to promote him, because then you have to deal with him, you have to clean up your act. The officers who left him, those officers went into administration. So not only did they get commended for their efforts, they got promoted as well. And that's the problem you run into with corruption, is that if you're in an environment that breeds it, that promotes it, quite literally promotes it, is the ability to deal with it is gone. There is no way to deal with it. You can do the best you can. You can be a new mayor coming in or anything like that. There's nothing you can do, because in the moment, in the nature of policing itself, there are going to be times where it's just you against a criminal, and you'll have one person beside you. And what happens in that moment, your life is entirely dependent on that person's life, right? The decisions that they make can bring you to safety and see you home that night, or they can kill you. And that's the nature of corruption. Is this a situation where I want to be trusting my life to someone who doesn't like me because I cause trouble? Right? Because those who are engaging in corruption, there is a lot of money that can be made from it. You can make more money from that than you can your police's salary. And you don't make bad money as a police officer. Is that a situation where you want the person who your life is dependent on? Do you want them to be corrupt? No. But if you're in an environment that's already corrupt, do you want them to make sure that they see you home? Well, if you want to do that, you need to be on the same side as them. Because if you put that line between you and them, it's like that's going to be a line that can separate you from them at a time of need when you need them. And dealing with the corruption, that kind of stuff, it's like it becomes near impossible, because that's a person who's your brother or sister. That's a person whose your life is going to be in their hands at some point, if it hasn't been already, and vice versa. And how do you separate out those types of social ties from the types of issues that you're having to trying to fix it? Or trying to, if you're on the administrative side of things, how are you going to go in to a place where there's already these established relationships, split them up to fix the corruption issue? It's like it's near impossible. That's why it's something that's always going to continue. That's something we're always going to struggle with to varying degrees. But like I said, each one of those commissions, you'll find out that there was some type of incident that took place that led to it being created. Each one will have some type of big incident. NAP is one of the biggest ones. The story of Serpico. I mean, I'm just giving you highlights here because of the amount of time I've already been talking. It is something that you can find his own words written out there. He's published a number of news articles, things like that himself, talking about corruption in the New York City Police Department, how it's continued. You can find his own words, or if you want, I think I still have a few of his articles. You can ask me and I can send some to you if you're interested. But it is something that, as long as there are decisions to be made, there's opportunity, and there is time when someone's not being watched, you will have people who use that time to do bad things. And that is the way it will always be. And with that, kind of a dark note, I guess I'm in kind of that mood, I suppose. That's the last thing I have to say for this class period. If you have any questions, you want me to go into any more detail on any of these topics, again, just let me know. You can send me an email before Wednesday and we'll talk more. I'll probably, like I said, I'll look through the book, see if there's anything I need to talk more about before we do a review. And then we'll review for our first exam. And if we do that review Wednesday, I'll make it due 1 week later. The exam will be 45 multiple choice questions and 1 essay, or it'll be 50 essay question or 50 multiple choice questions, each with 2 points each. I haven't decided yet, so we'll talk about that on Wednesday when we meet. And we'll, of course, like I said, we'll do a review beforehand. You'll have 90 minutes to do it, and you'll have that at least a whole week where it's open, where you can just go in and take it. With that, if you want to know more about something, email me. If you have any questions, email me. If you can't make it Wednesday, email me, because you want to be there Wednesday for the review. If you just need anything in general, I'm just an email away. With that, I will see you all later this week and hope you have a great day. Bye.